Hi, me again. January 13th, I will be a contestant on Jeopardy. Oh my God, how do I study that much that fast? Is it possible to know everything about everything? Or do producers actually just give you a list of questions? No, these answers and more coming up in the second video in a series about the Jeopardy contestant experience. Boom, ow. Let's talk about a little situation where, let's say somebody gets put on Jeopardy, but they also haven't read a book cover to cover in 8 years and they can name 6 composers and maybe 7 artists. What do they do? So that happened. That was my experience. Oh my gosh, I had to prepare. You don't have to learn everything to be on Jeopardy or to be even successful at Jeopardy or even bar trivia. There's a very specific way that you have to study, and I'd like to break this down starting with understanding how Jeopardy questions are written. So first things first, you need to know that Jeopardy writes good questions. Like, obviously the best trivia writers in the country, maybe second best, but they write good questions. And to understand what that means, it's maybe more helpful to look at bad questions. So bad questions, think like local homegrown bar trivia night, where they say things like, in what year was Louisa May Alcott born? You have 15 seconds. And you're just like, I don't know, like 1834? But actually the answer was 1833. So you for not knowing, you face, you idiot. Should have learned your early 1830 literature births better, you piece of strawberry pie. No, like that's an awful question. And that's kind of the essence of bad questions, are ones that they ask and your first response is, I don't know and I don't care. In one time, I was actually playing trivia, and the prime example of a bad trivia question was asked, can't make this up, was, according to an interview she did in 2017, what's Taylor Swift's favorite food to eat with a fork? I mean, fucking kill me. I mean, like, come on. Jeopardy doesn't do that. So going into an example of what you see on Jeopardy, let's take the topic of I-90. Bad trivia question would be, in what city does I-90 end? And you're like, okay, yeah, so I'm not gonna memorize like every interstate terminus city. And also, neither are Jeopardy contestants or the viewers at home. Nobody's ever gonna do it. But how Jeopardy would ask the same information would be with what I call a good question, which means the public can solve it and it's fun to solve and you feel accomplished for knowing the answer. So an actual Jeopardy clue that tests this was, talking baseball, I-90 bookends are Edgar Martinez Drive in Seattle and the Ted Williams Tunnel in this city. That's how we do it. There's so much more to this clue in the way that I would go about solving it, not knowing terminal cities, not knowing really anything about baseball, is that we're thinking Seattle. So I-90 bookends, that's probably east to west. So we're looking for an East Coast city that's about the same latitude as Seattle. Now onto the baseball part. Okay, again, I don't know who Ted Williams is. But there's a tunnel. So I'm thinking on the coast in city, there are 3 baseball teams I know that have cities in their names, and that's Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and Boston. Boston's the only one on the coast. And you see, there's a way to get to the answer without really knowing too much about baseball or I-90 or any of that stuff. So I could solve it and come up with Boston. And there's multiple routes that somebody else maybe could have gotten the same answer. And that's what makes it fun. But the key here is that word association. So there were things like baseball and tunnel and, Seattle and city. And that's how you get to the right answer. So that word association is really the name of the game. And that's right there is how you study for Jeopardy. So now that we have that, let's kind of walk through an example maybe. Pick a topic, Gone with the Wind. Okay, it's like a staple of American literature, film, yada, yada. Like it's fine. You might be tempted to go to a little website, maybe you heard of it, called Wikipedia, where you'll type in Gone with the Wind and you'll get a 13,000 word article. No, like that's not, first of all, that's barely fun to read even if you're into, like, just read the book at that point. But that aside, like, you're gonna see little paragraphs about like Philip Robillard dying in a bar fight in New Orleans, which is like an iota of the actual plot, but it's a whole paragraph on Wikipedia. That's not gonna be a good use of your time to study for anything. Instead, rather than Wikipedia, my number one recommendation for a source to study Jeopardy is Jeopardy. Yeah, obviously. I mean, it sounds obvious. Maybe it isn't. But to study for Jeopardy, study Jeopardy. And for this, I can direct you toward a fancy little website called J-Archive, where they've literally gone through and documented every clue and response asked on Jeopardy since the 1980s. And let's take a dive. So here it is. This is J-Archive. Beautiful function here. It's a little keyword search. So what you do here is type in the name Gone with the Wind, if we're going with our example. And right here, you'll instantly able to find that there have been 234 clues about it since 1985. This is perfect. This is where you build your word association, not Wikipedia. Go here. Not only can you measure how often any given topic appears, like for example, 234 times with Gone with the Wind, you'll notice they're only asking about the same 6 things when they ask about Gone with the Wind. So realizing that there's only 6 things you need to know, that's a secret sauce. So for Gone with the Wind, 90% of the questions can be covered by, Margaret Mitchell wrote it in 1936. It was a 2-part movie released 3 years later. Scarlett O'Hara and Tara, or Eras, show up in the character names. Hattie McDaniel was the first Black performer to win an Oscar for her, role in the film. And it took place in Civil War, Atlanta, Georgia. Also, Fiddle-Dee-Dee shows up a lot. Haven't read the book, don't know much about the context, but no, Fiddle-Dee-Dee is Gone with the Wind. And that's it, plain and simple. No matter what they ask, they're probably going to prompt you with at least one of these bullet points, and you just need to say, what is Gone with the Wind? Or who is Margaret Mitchell? And you're set. When you have a topic like this, get the basic word association down in 2 or 3 minutes and move on to the next topic. You're not going too deep and getting hung up on nitty-gritty Wikipedia details, just use previous Jeopardy questions. That'll tell you how deep you need to go. So that's what I did. I mean, take any subject. Let's do artists, for example. I'm awful at artists. I saw a Final Jeopardy question once that the category popped up and it was like British artists. And I mean, the question could have said, name any British artist. And I couldn't do it. Literally wouldn't have been able to write anything down. Lost all my money, cannot name a single British artist. But now through this word association, post-studying, I can now do what a lot of people pay a lot of money for art history degrees to also be able to do. And you can do it with just Google. So I'd start out just Googling things like most famous 50 paintings, or 25 Renaissance artists, or 20 American artists. And you'll just get these lists of who the big players are in whatever sub-art field you want. And then just make a list of whoever shows up on that, understand what are the famous people or paintings or whatever, and then do that word association thing, type it into J-Archive. I got from like 5% of Jeopardy art questions that I knew before to now 95%. Huge difference. It's really easy and you can do it too. So to show kind of how really breadth emphasized Jeopardy really is and how quick you can get this word association thing down, I will teach you 36 artists in 60 seconds using my Jeopardy word association. You ready? Ladies in bonnets are Manet. Ladies in tall hats are Seurat. Dreamy men in tall hats are Magritte. Dreamy trees with twig legs are Dolly. If the legs are thick, you've got a Matisse. And if they're wearing a tutu, that's Degas. Lilies and haze are Monet. Sunflowers or selfies are Van Gogh. Unless that selfie has a wicked unibrow, then you know it's Kahlo. If you've got an old sculpture, it's probably Rodin. Unless they're voluptuous, then that's more. And if it's not a sculpture, but instead just a urinal, that's how you know it's Duchamp. If it's a Dutch darkroom, that's Rembrandt. Unless it's in Norway, because then it's Munch. If it's Austria, Klimt, Tahiti, Gauguin. If it's a naive desert or rainforest, you know it's Rousseau. If the title's a symphony, you've got a Whistler. And if they must ask about a female, which they rarely do, it's usually Cassatt. Unless she's in New Mexico, then it's O'Keeffe. If it's a bowl of fruit, probably Cezanne, but if the bowl of fruit's actually Saturn eating his son, it's a mad Spanish Goya. Unless the Spaniard is great, then it's El Greco. For the Renaissance, Michelangelo did God, Da Vinci did Jesus, Raphael painted virgins, and Botticelli did Venus. For Americans, Wood did Farmers, Hopper did City Nights, Jackson did Splatters, and Warhol did Socialites. If it feels like a comic book cover, that's Lichtenstein, but Saturday Morning Post cover is Rockwell. Pastel House with a Pool, that's David Hockney. Cubes are Picasso, cubes with lines are Kandinsky, and if it's some other cubism, it's probably that Duchamp guy who, yeah, if you remember, also did the Urinal and Time. Okay, like I didn't time that. I don't know. You can time it. I don't know how long that is, but the point is that it's easy. It's all about breadth, not really about depth. And you can use previous Jeopardy questions to figure out how deep you need to go. So pick any subject. My tip for Jeopardy might be stick with like the high culture items. So do like your composers and operas and presidents and Shakespeare, and you can get pretty stinking far with this technique. Now, little disclaimer, there are 2 areas I claim you can't study You just can't do it. Well, we'll call it 3. The first is wordplay. I mean, every round there's maybe 2 categories that are just testing vocabulary, which your guess is as good as mine on like how to study for those. They're the things where they like give you, some clues where every response starts with the same letter or ends in the same syllable, things like that. On how to study for those. Also, geography. Jeopardy loves asking about world capitals and state nicknames. That's not an association thing. That's just memorizing. I mean, there's not much complexity to the subject other than just tying names to places and countries to capitals. I mean, so just, go on a website like Sporkle and memorize those if you'd like. The other tricky thing is music. And it's the same reason. It's also just kind of one of those shallow subjects where you just need to know maybe a line or a hook or the name of the artist, and that's mostly it. So for that, what I would recommend is just go on Spotify or wherever and search for Billboard #1 hits. You can go all the way back to the 50s. There's, 60 plus ish years of Billboard music. And maybe just, whenever you're in the car, listen to a few of those songs, pick maybe an era that you wouldn't typically listen to for those, and try to be a little bit conscious about what the names are and the artists, and sing along if you can, like build some connections in your brain for that, because that word association just doesn't work. These subjects aren't that complex for you to actually get that far. So besides memorizing those, this word association is absolutely the name of the game, and you've got to do it. But fun news, trivia is only half the battle, if even that, on Jeopardy. It's very helpful for getting through the audition process, but when you're actually preparing on the show, you don't win Jeopardy unless you have your buzzer and wagering strategy down. I mean, those are huge components too, and I'll get to all about those in my next video tomorrow. So for now, thanks for listening. Have a splendid, Friday here. I don't know where you are. And I'll talk to you later. Goodbye.